Hello, it's good to be here. So economics, you guys, dry as dust subject. Oh, where's that going? What? No, just a minute, okay. So let's just think about the economy and economics for a moment. And think about one or two of the stats that are out there at the moment. So one of them is, well, think about what's happening with technology, robotics, artificial intelligence, the internet, the fact that we all have an infrastructure that only corporates with huge budgets could have dreamt of not long ago. Big changes. Think about this stat. In 5 years' time, 40% of the current job supply will have disappeared. What does that mean in terms of unemployment, employability, and particularly when the remaining jobs, a good proportion of them, will be for Amazon picking stuff off shelves with a degree sometimes. So actually, economics is crucially important, and I'm here to, in part, to give you this message that what happens in 3, 4, 5, 6 years' time is going to be actually partly dependent on, believe it or not, you. Because people who've been in economics for years will be able to think as freely as you can. You're digital natives. This is the, you know, the area that you swim in, and there's going to be huge changes. Huge changes. Let me ask you a question. How many of you think you'll need a bank account in 5 years' time? Put your hand up, please. Okay, that's really interesting, because when a survey was done on this of millennials like yourselves, the proportion was something like 25%. It was much higher in this group. So let me ask you another question. Coming in, it's fine. And it isn't a trick question, but I want you to think about it for a moment, because the world we've known has changed radically in your lifetime already, right? And most of the reason for that is the internet. Okay, and it's been going on. Everyone thought it was kind of over with the bubble in 2000, but it isn't. It's building and building. And there are fundamental changes going on, and we don't see them every day because we're too close to them. So part of the furniture of your mind and mine and everyone else are these things called banks. So let me ask you this question. Just think about it for 30 seconds. Can you imagine a world without banks? What would that look like? Because if you were designing the world today as an engineer, and my background is as an engineer, I'll explain how I come to be doing this stuff. You know, dabbling in economics and crowdfunding and talking about the way the economy is changing. But if you were designing the world today, you know, if you have the technology we now have in terms of the internet, with banks beginning to talk about an internet of value that can move value around in the same way we move information around now, virtually no cost, and very quickly and freely, why would you need a bank? Sorry? Security. Okay, so traditionally that's a good reason, but how many people have heard of blockchain? Okay, so this is in crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is part of a much broader subject area called Fintech, which you may have heard of, financial technology, which includes crowdfunding and other forms of what you might call capital aggregation. It includes transferring money, people like Transferwise and the things that the banks have done for us traditionally, because they've held that central place and ground. And it includes things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, okay, which have that transferability built into them. And let me just give you a little flavour of what that means. So it's only just beginning to dawn, and if you kind of go and look, you'll find that these things are called Fintech Accelerators, which some of you will end up in, trust me. These are going to be some of the most exciting jobs going on the planet by the time you leave this place. So if you're lucky, you'll end up in a startup, in a Fintech Accelerator, or maybe working for a big institution trying to catch up with them. Because right now, all around the world, Barclays and Paribas and all of the big banks are setting up these Fintech Accelerators. What are they doing? They're trying to work out how to adapt these old institutions to work with this new technology. Because I am coming to answer the security question, but it's quite a long answer, as you've guessed already. Because what blockchain does, and blockchain is the technology that's been invented to make Bitcoin work, is it gives us an immutable, unchangeable ledger in the sky. Okay, it's ultra secure internet banking. It's one place where once you make a change, you can't scrub it out. It's not like a normal database. You can't go and change it. And it's run by cryptographic algorithms that are ultimately scrutable. Anyone can go and look, and if there's the smallest change made to them, everyone will know. And a research analyst recently from BNP Paribas, one of the biggest banks in the world, based in France, said this. He said, this should be regarded as a change on a parallel with the invention of the steam engine, the thing on which the Industrial Revolution was founded. It's a huge change. And right now, all of the banks are scrabbling to understand what this means for them. They're also scrabbling to understand what's going on in Silicon Valley, where I was a few weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, where lots and lots of entrepreneurs and startups are starting to eat the lunch of the traditional banking sector. In London, there's one a little bit more mature than this, they're now established, called Transferwise, who've come up with a peer-to-peer mechanism that makes it much faster, much cheaper for me to send money home if I'm in another country, or transact, across borders. That just wasn't possible before the internet, and actually wasn't possible probably 3 or 5 years ago. And what we have in terms of capital flows on that is we have, last year was the biggest year ever. It was a big year for venture capital going into fintech. And then last year it trebled. So I'm just trying to give you a feel for the size and scale, and actually the excitement of what's happening in a field that is, in my view, about to undergo a change that happens only about every 200 years. Okay? There's an article that Joe, if he hasn't already, will send on to you that I wrote for Virgin about this a little while ago. Economics since Adam Smith and so on, as I understand it, has been around for about that length of time, a little bit more. And the fundamental thinking behind it has not kept up with the dynamic economy as we now have it. Some of the fundamentals have changed. And just to give you a clue what's underneath that, your attitude to suppliers, to people who provide things, to buying things, is very different from not just my parents, but my generation. Rightly so. And there has been an inversion of power which we haven't digested yet. It's still being digested in terms of, you know, things being driven by demand. And the other thing that's making a huge difference is on the desk over here. He moves back out into shot. Is this. So before we move on to crowdfunding proper, which is part of the driver of all of this, you know, let me tell you why this is so important. Is there anyone in the room who doesn't have one of these? No, I didn't think so. So, do you all have a wallet or a purse? Yeah. Why would you go into the shower with both if you can do one? Okay. Why, when your money could be on here and we could transact here, or we could transact when you were far away or the other side of the world, why isn't money digital yet? Security. But it soon will be. And 2 years ago, 3 years ago, when some of the projects we did, when we were working on, wouldn't work because we didn't have ubiquitous. Now, these things are so cheap, they're so connected, that we've gone past a tipping point. And now, in the UK, you wouldn't have to do this, but if we went to another nation where they weren't ubiquitous, you could actually afford to give them away in order to make some of those things that you want to do work. So I say to you, you know, this is really important, and it is a more exciting time, I believe, to be an economist than in any time in the last 200 years. Come on in, have a seat. So, finally on that section, what that means is the job supply is going to shrink. So some of those jobs that might have been open to you won't be. But the economy is changing. And as we talk about crowdfunding, you'll see one of the reasons why I'm so interested in it from all sorts of different points of view, including economic ones. But it now provides the means for anyone with the drive, determination and an idea to create their own livelihood. And we haven't had that situation for a very long time now. We've been dependent on other people to create jobs for us to go and fill them, by and large. Now this crowdfunding changes that fundamentally. Okay, let's see if we can get this to cooperate. So, by way of just tailing on from the introduction, you know, where I come at this from is fundamentally as an engineer. My background is not as an economist, is as a technologist. My first job was in Fintech in 1979. We didn't call it Fintech back then, but I was designing systems for a major bank, and a number of them, in fact, over time, including HSBC, and one's that's now part of Santander. So I'm fascinated, and have been fascinated all along, all of this time, by the interaction between society and technology, and the way the one is changing the other, and as a result of that, and the work that Joe referred to earlier on, and the work that we've done with Parliament, because we realised very early on, we realised 3 or 4 years ago, how important this change, this crowdfunding thing, was going to be for not just for, you know, some individuals somewhere, but for us as an economy. We've been working with Parliament, and along the way they've said to us, you know, various intervals. Well, it's all very well for you to say this is different. It's much more transparent. You know, this is show us the numbers. So, as part of our role, we've collected a mountain of data. So, we've now tracked more than 275,000 crowdfunds from end to end over the last 19 or 20 months. Okay, since the beginning of last year. At any one time, we see around 20,000 active crowdfunds. That's a fraction of the crowdfunds going live at any, you know, alive at any one time in the world. In this English-speaking world, it's probably a half or a third, and that doesn't account for what's happening in China or India or any place that doesn't speak English. This is huge. Okay, next year the money flowing in the economy into entrepreneurialism, into new ventures from venture funding fund, venture capital, I should say, will be exceeded by crowdfunding. This is a huge thing, and we've been collecting data on, particularly on the rewards form of crowdfunding. Everyone gets really excited and interested by the big numbers associated with crowd lending and equity crowdfunding, and then this other thing, which was the original innovation called rewards crowdfunding, that tends to raise smaller amounts of money and therefore is less significant, right? No, actually, you wouldn't believe that would stand up as an argument, or that people would rely on that as a guide. But governments, the press, everyone else thinks big is important. And actually, when you're starting a business, and entrepreneurialism is hugely important for the kinds of reasons I've just been talking about, both to the economy and to every person in this room, right? Small amounts of money when you need them are much more important. That first amount of money, you know, anyone who works in venture capital, anyone who works in angel funding will tell you, is the hardest and the most crucial to get, because once you get past a certain stage, you have more credibility. It gets easier. And we'll look at the reasons for that in a minute or two, if I've got the right slides. If I haven't, we'll talk about something else. So I want to sort of break this up into sections, and you know, give the chance for sort of questions as we go. So either I'll move on to the next section unless there's any questions at this point. Okay, so we'll move on to the next section. Okay, so I'm going to click through some of these. There's one particular one. Oh, there it goes, a Bitcoin. I want to get to. Where's it gone? So we've had technical problems several times today already, and it is here somewhere. Okay, let's do this. It's not the presentation I thought it was, but I know it's here someplace. There we go. Okay, so why is this crowdfunding thing so important? Okay, so is there anyone? Sorry, I'm not going to ask you to put your hands up to tell me, you know, what you don't know, because that's embarrassing. But if you know and could explain to me what all four kinds of crowdfunding is, would you please put your hand up, because otherwise I will explain. Okay, so there are four kinds of crowdfunding. Okay, they're very distinct. So there's the one that everyone gets very excited about. That's equity crowdfunding. Okay, equity is shares. So it's Dragon's Den, online, with video and a time scale, and anyone can invest. That's it in a nutshell. What it means is that you can form a company, and if you've got a good enough proposition, you can get it out there on your terms. Traditionally, if you wanted to fund something, you had to find someone who had the money that you don't have, which meant fundamentally you had to do it on their terms. That in itself is a big change, but it's not the biggest change. Okay, so that's number one. So that's equity crowdfunding. Sorry? It's a little bit like private equity, but it's very open. So it's online. Everyone can, come and have a look at that and decide whether they're going to contribute or not. Yeah. Come back to some of that stuff in a minute. So a more familiar form is charitable crowdfunding, charitable giving. So some of the existing platforms who've done charitable donations in another form, like Just Giving, now have opened a crowdfunding platform, following much more the ethic and the style of crowdfunding in terms of the video and so on. And the campaign and so on. So it's a bit of a spin on traditional donations. So that's donations and equity. Okay. Then there's crowd lending. Okay. So otherwise known as peer-to-peer lending. Okay. Very much like a bank loan, but instead of an institution having a ton of money to lend, it's pieced together from dozens or hundreds of people. So let's say Kay here needed a loan to buy a car, and the bank wasn't lending right now because it was in crisis, as they were a little while back. Okay, and they went, they cut all the lending back. Zopa, a world first, happened in the UK. ZOPA, great innovation, allowed me and you and you and you and you to put our tenors in, or 20 quid or 30 quid, and put the money up for that loan. Okay, this has worked fantastically well. The default rates are much higher. No, the default rates are a tiny fraction of traditional lending. Yeah, so you'd think big bank able to beat people up really well if they didn't repay would have much lower default rates. It's the other way around. And actually, it's really simple actually. If you borrow money from the bank, by and large, if you're an average person, you'll pay that back, if you can, when you need to. But you actually don't give a damn. If I loan you some money and some other people, care enough to loan you the money, actually you repay it more readily. So crowd lending is a lot of people coming together to provide the money for a loan. It's huge. It's taken off here. It's taken off big time in the States. Billions. The 13th biggest bank in the USA isn't a bank. It's a crowd lending platform. And it's new. It's not been around for 100 years. It's been around for, I think, 3 years. Done its IPO, became the 13th biggest bank in America. The world is changing. And there's two flavors of peer-to-peer lending or crowd lending. Zopa, as I've described it, is what you might call peer-to-peer B2B, ordinary people to ordinary people. The other form, which Funding Circle, is the biggest one in the UK. You might want to look them up. Funding Circle. They are B2C. So they are people, institutions, others coming together to provide money to businesses. Okay. So that's 3 forms of crowdfunding. The fourth one, you've probably all heard of Kickstarter. Anyone want to admit to not having heard of Kickstarter? No, I didn't think so. So Kickstarter is an example. It's not the original one. Indiegogo is the original one. Indiegogo and its founders are the inventors of crowdfunding as a whole, in my view, and certainly of rewards crowdfunding. And that's this kind of thing that is, on the one hand, transformative for entrepreneurs and transformative for the economy, and on the other hand, totally disregarded. It's amazing. People are so used to, when I say people, I mean, we talk to government about this all the time. I went to a meeting recently at the British Business Bank. We had a representative from the Department of Business Innovation and Skills there, who we talk to frequently. And they'd recently, it really tells the story, they'd recently done a survey of investment into businesses in the UK, angel investment. And there were two things. One is, you don't often see a graph like this, like an X. But they have an X graph in that report. You can look it up online, you'll see it. British Business Bank report on crowdfunding. And what's going down is angel investing. And what's going up is equity crowdfunding. And angel investing is moving house from the one to the other and joining with other people. So that was really interesting. And they tell the story, the stats tell the story of massive growth, you know, a new industry happening. Well, maybe. It's not just an industry, it's something more than that. But they tell that story. And we were chatting to them and they said, well, of course, you do realise, going back to our data mountain, that you've captured 3 to 5% of what crowdfunding is doing in the UK. The other 95 or 97% by our count is rewards-based crowdfunding. They'd made that mistake I described earlier of thinking because it's big chunks, it's more important. And this is enabling more businesses, and you know, probably more businesses than the government initiatives that are out there to do this, into which huge amounts of public funds are being placed. So let me explain to you why that is, why it's important, and how it works, and then we'll take questions. So let's talk about, thank you, let's talk about the entrepreneur's journey. So anyone who's, yeah, thank you, Prezi. I don't quite know why it wants to keep telling me it's full screen. One of the things, if you've ever tried to start a business or know anyone who has, the left-hand side of this will be, you know, familiar to you. So you always start with an idea, you know, with something you want to do. And if you're wise, you'll do some market research and you'll find out what's out there and how you're going to differentiate yourself and so on and so on. And maybe it falls apart at that stage, and maybe it gets even more interesting. Then maybe you'll write a business plan, but if you're really wise, you'll get a lean canvas, by the way. But you'll make a plan, okay? Because that's something you're going to need. Most investors now will just be just as happy with a lean slate as a business plan. Some of them are, you know, more old-fashioned on this sort of thing. But you're going to need some kind of a plan, because unless you can fund it yourself, traditionally, or you've got a rich uncle, if you have, speak to me later, you're going to need to go and find an investor, right? So off we go on the trail to find an investor. And it's pretty much like going into acting, in the sense that it's a life filled with rejection. Okay, can you imagine? You know, you're tipping up, you're profiling these people, really difficult to make contact with. You know, you can go through some of the networks, but that costs money as well. But maybe you can do that, maybe you can't. Even so, these people are kind of up there and hard to contact. You finally get a meeting. You know, it takes time. When you get a meeting, you find out whether there's much of a match between what they want to do, what they're interested in, and whether they like you or not, which really matters, believe it or not, matters a lot, and in your plan. And guess what? 9 times out of 10, no, 99 times out of 100 or more, that's where the trail ends. You've got a less than 1% chance of passing the audition, okay, and getting to the next stage. But try not to think about that and just carry on, okay? So we'll come back to that in a moment. Then let's say you get that far. So let's talk about the next stage in the process. So at that stage in the process, I've got someone interested in my idea. He thinks my business plan, or she thinks my business plan might work, right? We come to terms, the term sheet, right? At this point, where are we? Okay, well, I'm down here. I need the money. I've been doing this for an awfully long time. I'm, maybe near to exhaustion. You've got the money and you've got time. Is this it's a difficult negotiation not from a position of strength. So, okay, we get through that. We're ultra lucky, we're ultra smart, we're really good at negotiating, or preferably all three, and we get funded. Woohoo! We've got the money to start our business. So now it's time to turn the boat. Because we've just spent however long it took, and it's an open-ended process, out of your control. It takes as long as it takes. We now have to turn the boat from finding the investor and finding the way to convince them to thinking clearly about the product and the market and the fit between the two. How are you going to reach them? And all the things that if you start crowdfunding, you have to do right down here. Okay? Because before you launch your Kickstarter or your rewards crowdfund, you need to have thought intently about those things. You're actually doing the things that you wouldn't otherwise do until you're up here, down here. Yeah? So the market, the price point, the fit, how you're going to reach the market, how you're going to market it, and so on. And then you go into this phase, which is your crowdfund. Okay, and you have got a dismal chance of success. It's dismal. It's 1 in 4. Right? Except if you compare it with the one up here, which is 1 in 100. And this is a closed-ended process that's going to take, 30 days or something. Sorry about this. I don't know why it's being so iffy. Now we've got a closed-ended process, we're going to get an answer. And by the way, that 25% isn't fixed. Right? You can double it straight away. You can have a 50% chance of success by preparing well. How do we know this? Because we've analysed 200,000 crowdfunds, and we've found that half of them never get past 10%. They didn't prepare, they didn't have a good proposition, they didn't communicate it well. So right away you can up your chances of success. Then, if you do the right things, and we can tell you what the right things are in about 10 minutes, and we can look at your proposition and we can tell you that, and there's other people that can do this, in 10 minutes say, okay, these are the things you need to address to push your percentage rate up into the 60, 70, 80% level. Okay? So that's transformative in itself. So either you get funded or you don't, and you know quickly, and it's largely in your control. You've got a lot more control as an entrepreneur. So let's say you don't get funded. You've just spent up to 3 months preparing and around a month running a crowdfunding campaign. You didn't get the money, but if you did half well, you got a crowd of people who are interested in what you're doing. You did lots of pitches, zillions of pitches in parallel, and instead of being rejected in serial, you've collected people in parallel who are interested, and they're, guess what, still interested. And the biggest crowdfunds that have gone into the millions, Pebble Watch needed 100,000, ended up with 10 million, failed first time. And they learn from that. And it's a very intensive way of learning about marketing and running a business. But you got the needle up and you got the funding. So phew, great, now we've got to deliver the product. But just have a look at the vista for you as an entrepreneur at that point. So down here, a couple of months or so ago, you were a guy with an idea who'd done some work on it, or a girl who was probably a bit better prepared, actually, on average. Because it turns out women are better at crowdfunding, by the way. Sorry, guys, but it's true. We got the stats. You've gone from a person with an idea to someone who's got a product or a service for which there's a market, and you know what the fit is, and you know how to reach it, and you've proved that, and you've got some initial revenues. And if that isn't the definition of an investable business, as opposed to a man with an idea, I don't know what is. Which is why we know that increasingly, having had all this exposure, investors are doing the unknown. We've got reversal. We've got investors coming looking for people who've been crowdfunded, for ventures that are crowdfunded, to invest in them. So at that point, I've got choices. Maybe I just want to keep on going. Yeah, because I haven't got a debt burden, haven't lost any equity, and I've got customers. Horrible deal, isn't it? Horrible. Or maybe I want to work with one of these angels who wants to work with me, who's self-selected. That's not bad. Or maybe I want to go to more traditional investment. So I could, we can talk about the mechanics of this stuff or how it works, but what I want, the thing I'd like to leave you with, and we'll go to questions in a minute or two, I'm hoping there are going to be some questions, is that this is something that's happening. It's something that's driving things like fintech, because it's people like us in the market, it's the crowd that are increasingly demanding the kind of services that we want and getting them, and they're being made by entrepreneurs who are using this sort of stuff to get their ventures off the ground. Any questions?
So are the people within the crowd stakeholders in the business?
Okay, so the simple answer is yes. The technical answer, right, is if it's equity crowdfunding, they're buying a share in the business. So they have shares. So they are participants in the business in that sense. But to give you a fuller answer, one of the key motivations for people contributing to a rewards crowdfund is to be part of it in an emotional sense. So very often it's about, I want this thing to happen. And my 10 or 20 quid or 50 quid or 100 quid is as much about, I want that thing to exist, as it is about any return I'm going to get. And with things like the Pebble Watch, there are all the motivations, like I want to be the first. But being part of the story is a big part of it. And what we find, and regulators around the world are struggling with this, is whereas we've had this mindset, it's all about ROI, it's all about return on investment, it's all about the money. What we find is in the different forms of crowdfunding, there's a different mix between those two things. Okay, so in crowd lending, it's mostly about the money. I want to know I'm going to get my money back, and I want to know I'm going to get the interest, and I'd also like it to go to Kay, who I like the look of, rather than someone I didn't. With equity crowdfunding, for shares, there's more of a balance. Quite often people will put money in that they don't actually expect to see back. Yeah, 100 quid or whatever, because they want the venture to happen. And they'll get their shares, and if they get something back from it, they're quite happy. But there's a balance there. With rewards crowdfunding, sometimes it's the product, sometimes it's the people that you want to back, give them the chance to do something that you want to see done. And one of the interesting stats is, knowing some of the platform owners, they tell us these things, that about a third, is it 20% or 30% of rewards are never claimed, because the people put the money in weren't really interested in the reward. They were just interested in seeing it happen. So there's interesting stuff going on there.
When you've got equity funding and the war crowdfunding, from the sort of data you've observed, what's been the fastest growing division between equity funding and the war crowdfunding? But what's got the biggest future for like a small business?
The rewards crowdfunding is growing much faster. It's already much more virulent. However, they do different jobs. They're a camera and a screwdriver. So the rewards crowdfunding is the instrument of choice, if you like, for startups, particularly very early stage, where it goes where it's the Heineken that goes where other funding methods just can't even begin to reach. And actually forms a good foundation to go on and do other forms of funding, as we were just talking about. So equity funding tends to come on at the next stage when you've already proved you're investable. So to give you an idea of the scale, in the UK, the originators of equity crowdfunding, Crowdcube, have just this week celebrated 300 ventures that they've helped. We see 3 times that every week in rewards crowdfunding. So give you an idea of the scale. That those won't be all successful ventures, but it's much bigger scale, smaller numbers, helping get things off the ground. Does that make sense? Yeah.
From a legal perspective, how does that work when you have, say, an investor from the U.S. or in terms of equity crowdfunding, an investor from the UK, somebody from China, and the company is based in, we'll say, Lebanon? How do you're crossing borders on the internet, but how do you legally get around that?
So how does it work?
Like if you've got 100,000 people that are investing in your equity, how do you get the 100,000 people to whichever country you choose as your base to get them to go through the legal system of actually being a shareholder?
Yeah. So when you've got potential shareholders scattered around the world, how does that work? And the answer is really badly. Rewards crowdfunding is global. Equity crowdfunding is by and large bound by jurisdictions. So by and large, there are little breakthroughs in this. So usually money flows with equity crowdfunding within the UK or within the EU. It doesn't usually flow across boundaries because of these regulatory and legal issues. We are headed for a global world, but this looks like a problem that's going to take a decade to resolve. But I think it will be resolved.
And the second part of the question, how do you prevent from like pyramid schemes or scandals, somebody that's after just to, several years ago there was an email that went around, buy my book if you want to know how to be a millionaire, and then you buy it for $1 and you get an email, well, this is how I did it. I got $1 from everybody that wanted to be a millionaire. So it's it's how do you
so what you have to do is you have to find a way to massively scale the regulator at no cost, and it's called the crowd, and it works. And the rates of default, the rates of fraud are astonishingly low. And if you think about it, it makes sense. When you're crowdfunding, it's very public and it's very personal. You are putting your face, your name, your personal capital on the line in a very wide open forum. And anyone who comes and looks at that can put their hand up and go, that chap over there, I saw him 2 years ago running a scam doing this. So it's like, it's like inviting the police to watch while you rob the bank. You know, it just doesn't work as a model. It's not attractive to fraudsters because they tend to be a little bit smarter than that. And you know, we've now had 7 years of history. So the answer is that there's a famous American judge, Brandeis, something like that, who said that for a lot of these problems, the answer is sunlight and fresh air. And when you open things up, people behave differently, and it really makes a huge difference. And I think that it's the end of the 50 minutes. So I'd love to take some more questions, you know, but I think they're going to be beating on the door. Thank you all. Thank you.